Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's that time of year again. The NFL is kicking off in a couple of days. I've been getting a couple of requests to do an NFL prediction video, and every year, I guess this is like the second year of doing NFL. I started off by predicting who's going to win each division and ranking the teams in each division. Most of the people that are on this channel, new to the channel, might only know me for baseball content, and that's really the highlight of this channel. However, as we shift into the postseason of the MLB and the NFL kicks off, when that MLB ends, I continue going with the NFL because most of the people that have been around for a number of years, they really like it. They like talking about NFL. If you want to keep talking about that kind of stuff, the Discord is going all year round. And and on top of that, I do want to announce I am doing a channel survivor pool. If you're interested in it, the entry fee, there's none. You can join for free. The link will be in the description below. I will be giving away a hat for whoever wins the survivor pool, hoping to get 20 plus 30, maybe even 50 people to join. That would be awesome. First time I'm running it. Normally we do a fantasy draft with my baby on the way coming this week. I don't really have time to do that kind of stuff, so just want to put that out there. On top of that, before the comments get all ragey cagey of some of my predictions, guys, I'm not like a hardcore NFL fan. I do watch every week. I do follow the league, not nearly as much as baseball. I do this for fun. It's more of a casual sports fan channel overall, so let's just enjoy it and let me see how inaccurate I can be. And we start things off with the AFC, so I'm going to do that first. We're going to start on the East side. I'm going to try to talk a little bit about each team. If I miss something, the channel's great for that. The comments section is a great way to keep the conversation going, and that's really what I always go for, so make sure you do that. And yeah, let's just jump into it before I rant for probably 30, 40 minutes, however long this ends up going. So we're going to start with the East. Going to start at the bottom. Don't really think there's too much to talk about in the AFC East. When it comes to the last place, New England Patriots. The AFC East, they're matched up two divisions this year with the AFC South. So they're going to play everyone in the AFC South. And then on the NFC side of stuff, they're playing the West. So that's the Seahawks, the Rams, the 49ers. That's kind of how their schedule pans out. Patriots, not a lot going for them. And of course, they did draft a quarterback, and they got a new head coach with Mayo. Jacoby Brissett is been named the starter for them this week, but again, they have a tough hill to climb coming off Mac Jones kind of season and really rough couple of years for them. Patriots, they're in probably the powerhouse division. I don't know really what else to add to this team. Maybe looking to make some steps forward. Maybe we're going to see Drake, their rookie quarterback, come in a little bit later in the season. But other than that, they're probably going to get a couple of wins, and they're probably going to be people's number one pick to pick against a lot of the time when it comes to the survivor pool. Now, when we get into the next three teams, this part is really difficult for me. Could honestly go any which order, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people have different than me. But surprisingly, I do have my number three team being my own favorite team, the Miami Dolphins. Seems like for me that they just can't figure out how to beat the teams in the big situations. We do see them make some additions, of course, to bring in Odell Beckham. He's probably going to miss a couple of weeks. He is going to potentially slot in behind Waddle, behind Hill, for a pretty lethal three wide receiver combo, if he can even get a little bit to where he was before. Dolphins, of course, trying to build off last season, top offense in the league. Are they going to be able to compete, though, on the defensive side of the ball? That is one of the big questions for me. I don't know if we want to get into shootout kind of situations, and I'm always curious after a quarterback signs a big contract like Tua just did, will he continue to elevate his game, get better now that he's been committed to, or kind of like chill? He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would start to chill, but this division's tough, and I had to pick someone. And then number two, got the Buffalo Bills. A big impact of why I do have them at number two is I do think they have one of the toughest schedules across the entire NFL. Of course, finishing first last year, they're going to face the Ravens from the north. Finishing first, they're going to face the Houston Texans in the south. They're going to face the Kansas City Chiefs in the west, and that's going to lead up to a tough situation. Diggs on his way out to Houston kind of makes room for him. He didn't really have an impactful 100-yard game think anywhere past week 5, I think I remember reading last week. So it's not like a huge difference, but of course they do lose Gabe Davis as well. So it's going to be whether or not the other wide receivers can start to make a difference. Kincaid, a big impact on the tight end situation, whether he can continue to do with that, and them losing their two, Porter and Hyde, on the defensive side of the ball could potentially come back. It's a big shift in Buffalo, but at the end of the day, they have Josh Allen, and if he can lead this team to a division win, I very much expect, if that's the case, that he will be MVP, and that probably will be without a doubt. But I do have the New York Jets at number 1, and this is probably going to be a little controversial. I don't think it's going to be the most common pick. Bills are probably up there. Dolphins are probably up there. But for me, the Jets, they have a couple things going for them. They finally have a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, while he is 40 years old, he can throw dimes, right? And we saw someone like Tom Brady be able to throw accurate ball, and that's all you really need to do. The one issue, of course, is with the O-line on the Jets there, whether or not they are going to be able to protect him long enough. They protected him only a couple snaps last year. Was it a third snap where he finally got hurt? But on top of that, they have Sauce Gardner, lethal guy on the safety side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball, and of course Garrett Wilson, whether he's going to be the top guy going forward. Garrett Wilson potentially on his way to being top wide receiver in the whole league, as long as he finally gets someone. He's one of those guys that always seems to catch it with little space, and that's going to be fun to watch. Do you think the fact that they do have a little bit of an easier schedule, having finished third in the division last year, is going to play a role? Because I do think all of these teams are going to be super tight in the standings when they play each other. I think there's going to be a lot of splits between the three of them, and the difference in this and my decision is basically that. But yeah, moving on to the North Division, and this one was a little tough, but I think in the bottom you kind of could go two of which ways. I ended up leaning with the Cleveland Browns, and honestly the thing that put me there the most was Deshaun Watson. Just the fact that he's never really been able to get a team out of the gutter his whole life. He always seems to be that kind of guy. It's been a bad impact on his teams. Nick Chubb still going to be coming back from his injury last year, not quite at 100% yet, I don't believe, and it's going to be a little bit before he does that. Watson with that shoulder injury last year, whether he's going to be able to figure it out, and honestly, if those two guys don't figure it out, this team, in my opinion, is not going to be able to win games offensively. Of course, they always have Myles Garrett on the defensive side of the ball. He very well could just be even bigger of a monster than he was in the past. But yeah, I think the defense on this side, having given up the fewest yards in the NFL last year, is going to be a tough feat to double up on. And I think in their division, it's going to just be a little bit tougher. At number 3, this arguably could be a team that you might consider to be last place in this division. I do have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bringing in Russell Wilson and bringing in Justin Fields has created somewhat of a quarterback controversy, and while Russell Wilson has been named the starting quarterback for week 1, it doesn't always work out when you have two quarterbacks in this exact situation like they really do. They added some defense, which to me is shocking because this team is all about defense before. TJ Watt is still in there, and he's going to make very impactful. The Steelers, I think, are the team that hasn't lost, or under Tomlin at least, won less than 9 games. So that, I think, is going to be up for grabs this season. Whether they hit 9, I don't know if that's going to be the benchmark. Right now, I don't really consider either of these teams in the playoffs. At number 2, I do have the Cincinnati Bengals. Burrow is back from his wrist surgery on his throwing hand. Whether or not he's going to be at full capacity is another question. They lost Joe Mixon in the backfield, so a guy that has been a staple on that team for a long time. The only thing to me is that they do still continue to have those wide receiver weapons, which is going to be very impactful as Burrow and his wide receivers can get back to where we saw them a couple of years ago. They're very much going to be an impactful team, and they're going to be fighting for that playoff spot, if not for the division lead. For right now, number 1 continues to be Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. A lot of things happening here. They added even more weapons to their run game with Derrick Henry coming in, which absolutely crazy, actually. They were number 1 in rushing last year overall. So the fact that they bring him in is just going to be scary. I'm very interested to see how Lamar Jackson pairs up with him. Of course, they bring in some other guys on the wide receiver as well. We'll see how on the defensive side of the ball, they're not bringing back their same guys. They were number one in a lot of areas last year on that. So there will be a little bit of a setback, I think. The gap might not be as big, but I do think the Ravens are very much potentially the strongest team in this whole conference and something to keep an eye on. Moving on. AFC South. This one was pretty interesting because a lot of these teams, I think, they're pretty even across the board. I really had to make some tough decisions, and I kind of landed at Tennessee being the number 4 seed on this team. They bring in Ridley at the wide receiver. They're still going with Will Levis as their quarterback, which to me isn't the long-term solution, of course, but they kind of had to do something, right? Tony Pollard's coming in the backfield, another guy that's kind of coming in, taking over for Derrick Henry. They were ready to move on from Henry. Pollard ready to move on from Dallas, so that's going to be pretty interesting how he fits in here. But at the end of the day, I think Tennessee is pretty stacked, like pretty depth-driven and pretty solid across the board as a team, and that's kind of going to end up being the theme of the AFC South. Would not be shocked if any of these teams end up anywhere. This one was, in my opinion, one of the hardest divisions to predict, and I have at number 3 the Jacksonville Jaguars. They did take a few steps forward, it felt like, last year. Trevor Lawrence down the stretch getting injured really set them back. What was it? Kirk got hurt, I think, as well down the stretch. Maybe it was the other wide receiver. But either way, as long as those two guys can stay healthy, I think they are going to continue to be somewhat of a strong offense on that side of the ball. I'm not so certain how their defense will match up, but they're one team I'm kind of interested in. I would not be shocked to have a disaster season come out of Jacksonville. At number 2, I have the Indianapolis Colts, and maybe this one is a little bit out there with Richardson coming back at quarterback. He's dealing with that shoulder injury from last year. Seems to be all right, and that everything's going to be moving forward. Jonathan Taylor seems to be back and healthy again as well. So having their 2 arguably keyest players on their offense being back, it's going to make up a big difference from what they were dealing with last year. Last year, they were still very competitive as well without those guys, so I kind of expect them to be able to take a little bit of a step forward and build off of kind of what they've ended up doing last year. They were pretty competitive, especially down the stretch last year. At number 1, it's going to be hard to argue. I think most people are going to have these guys as the number 1. They kind of barely squeaked out that spot last year and first in the division, but it is going to end up hurting them a little bit, right? Because they are going to play the top teams across the other divisions. The South, I already talked about, plays the East in the AFC, but they also go in to the other side and play the NFC North, which is maybe a little bit of the weaker division on the other side. We'll get to it in a minute. But the South kind of matching up that I think 1 or 2 teams could potentially get out of this and into the playoffs. CJ Stroud bringing in some new weapons, of course, to work with as well. They got some great defense. Mixon's in there. And the O-line seems to be somewhat getting improved as well. So Houston making some big impactful changes. Was it Diggs that ended up going there, I think, as well? So just going to be interesting to watch. CJ Stroud going into his sophomore year. Does he keep building off last year? Sometimes there's a little bit of a sophomore slump, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Moving on to the West in the AFC, they are going to match up against the North. Kind of think I forgot to talk about the North, but they are also going to match up with the NFC South. So a little bit of a matchup there, and it'll be pretty exciting to talk that. Denver, I think, is the bottom of the field. They're one of the youngest teams across the NFL. We saw that with Green Bay last year. It didn't necessarily hurt them, but it's something to definitely consider. Sean Payton coming in, being the head coach, dealing with this new quarterback. What was it? Bo Nix is their quarterback. Honestly, I hadn't even heard of the guy before. So I did a little bit of research. He seemed to play a ton of NCAA games. Was it 3 full seasons? Kind of rare for a young quarterback, 23 years old. Maybe that'll be helpful to have that little bit of more age to him coming in. But at the same time, Denver, they don't really have a lot of expectations, and sometimes that works for a benefit of a team. But right now, I do have them at number 4. At number 3, I do have the LA Chargers. I almost called them San Diego, even though it's been like 5 years since they went over. The Chargers, they bring in Jim Harbaugh as a head coach, and we all know what he's capable of. Very impactful head coach, and I'm very interested. It always seems like the meme of the LA Chargers has been their head coach, at least for the past two. So it'd be nice to see a coach that can actually make some good decisions, it feels like, for once. The one concern we got Herbert. Of course, at quarterback, solid guy back there, but they seem to be losing their wide receivers' weapons with Keenan Allen. He's gone. Williams also gone. So they don't really have that star guy that they are used to having. How will that impact Herbert? In my opinion, it's going to drop them down the board, potentially move them out of the playoff race, and potentially be at 500. But who knows? Jim Harbaugh could really make a difference. At number 2, I do have the Las Vegas Raiders. Interesting situation, honestly, for them. Bringing in Gardner Minshew as their quarterback really caught me off guard when I was getting ready for this. Gardner Minshew always seems to kind of find a way to start in the NFL. He starts on the bench and whatnot, and then he eventually gets there, and then again, he's in the Raiders. Of course, they maybe are looking for a season where they drop down and finally draft a quarterback, but at the same time, Gardner Minshew has been known to be a gunslinger, much like Fitzgerald was the years at Tampa Bay. It's possible that he could do that with Devontae Adams. Apparently, they've been doing pretty well there. And of course, Max Crosby, I think they drafted another defensive end or someone on the defensive line at least high up in the draft who is just going to match up with Crosby, and between those two guys, maybe they make a huge, massive difference. But at the end of the day, I have them at 2, potentially not even a playoff team. But I do think this is a kind of a tough division to choose. But the one thing that isn't tough is who's going to be on top. Don't really need to talk too much about them. Xavier Worthy, their wide receiver, number 1 pick this year, is going to come and slot right in there in the offense, and whether or not he makes impactful, and Mahomes can potentially make anyone look good. They always have Travis Kelce, and since Hill kind of left, they haven't had that deep threat like they're going to have with potentially this guy. So it's going to be exciting to see what kind of game he opens up for the running backs, what kind of game he opens up for someone like Kelce. And of course, it's Andy Reid as the coach, so you always know he has something up his sleeve, and that's where I am kind of going with the AFC. So if you're going to make it to this point, just remember I do mostly do baseball, but with the baseball season ending, the power rankings will shift into the NFL, which I typically start after week 3 just because there's been 3 games. You kind of have more of an idea. And if you like football content and you want to keep sticking around and you haven't seen this stuff before, make sure you hit that subscribe button because it makes a big difference. The channel's growing, and I'm all about doing giveaways, as you saw at the beginning of the video. Otherwise, guys, we're going to jump into the NFC, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, we are back for the NFC. We're just going to jump right into it with the NFC East. And for this, bottom could go probably a couple of ways. I wouldn't be surprised, but right now I do have the Washington Commanders. Just drafting a fresh quarterback in a division that is going to be a lot of guys competing, really talking Super Bowl for them. Jaden Daniels isn't going to be the answer right away. He might be able to be the answer in the long term, but I think with everything going on, it just isn't going to be too much impactful. Bringing in Austin Eckler in the backfield might make a difference. Having someone to dish the ball off to in the short term and to bail him out of situations is going to be very helpful. And of course, Eckler has a history of being lights out. But Washington, I just think they have a lot of room to grow. And the one team I do have slightly ahead of them is the New York Giants. Arguably, losing Barkley could potentially hurt them and put them back in the bottom. It might be not very good that they're going to be moving up. But for them, Malik Nobles, the number 1 wide receiver that they drafted in the draft this year, very much could be an impact right off the bat. Daniel Jones has never really had a wide receiver number 1 step up. Of course, it's very potentially driven that it's not going to work out. It's always a rookie situation, but it seems more often as of late that these number 1 wide receivers are immediately impacting teams. So I'm excited to see if Daniel Jones has the option to throw deep. He'll also use his legs. He's not afraid to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how the Giants play out. And at number 2, contrary to popular belief, they always seem to be a pretty good regular season team. If this was playoffs, I know I've probably predicted them to go somewhat deep last year. I'm not going to fall for it this year. I don't care how much they look good in the season, it always seems to be a fall apart situation for them. They have a tough schedule to start. 5 of the first 7 weeks, I believe, are against playoff teams from last year. If they can get past that with a winning record, they're pretty much going to be cruising, I think, on their way to the playoffs. And with Dak Prescott, and they got CeeDee Lamb, and the name Parsons is slipping my mind a bit here on defense. A lot of people are saying he's potentially going to set some sack records this year. Watch out for Dallas. I think very much season-wise, during the season, they're going to be very impactful, as always. The only problem is I do think that the Philadelphia Eagles just seem to be getting better and better. They bring in Barkley this year in the backfield, and they continue to have the most lethal wide receivers that Jalen Hurts can throw to. So I think the offense is going to be amazing. Whether or not losing Jason Kelce at center makes a big deal, we will shortly see. Of course, being an all-pro all the time does have an impact in that situation. The guy in the center, he's a big deal. But the Eagles, I think, are on their way to winning the East and potentially being a top Super Bowl contender. Moving on to the North. It seems like a little bit of a shift. It's not the same North that it has been. At number 4, I do have the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to be starting Sam Darnold this year because McCarthy? JJ McCarthy is out for the season. He is their number 1 draft pick in the 2024 draft. He's going to be the quarterback of the future. He's hurt. I couldn't really figure out if he was hurt early or it was last year. Didn't really go too much into it. But Sam Darnold's starting for these guys. And if that's your number 1 pick, I'm a little worried with how this team's going. Of course, they bring in Aaron Jones in the running back situation. They have Justin Jefferson, who's always going to be a big lethal part. But with the rest of this division always seeming to improve and have been on the upward trend as of late for the past couple of years, having Sam Darnold is just going to be a stake in your heart, and they're going to be looking for top draft pick going into next year. At number 3, I have the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams is going to be starting for this team, and it's going to be exciting to watch the number 1 pick. It's always exciting when these young guys come in and are potentially immediate impact. Of course, they already had their attempt with Justin Fields. It's round 2, but this is apparently going to be a better round 2. I don't watch a whole lot of preseason football, if any, so if anything's going on that, I am not aware. But they also bring in like Allen, they bring in Swift, so Keenan Allen's going to be on the wide. Swift on the running back situation in Chicago is just going to be interesting. On the defensive side of the ball, they don't technically have very strong pass rush whatsoever. They were really one of their lower aspects of last year, and that's going to be impactful, especially when you have people like Goff, you have someone like Love in your own division. Giving them more time is not going to be good. At number 2, I do have the Detroit Lions. I do not have them repeating as the division winners this year. A little bit of a tougher schedule. They're going to be playing the Eagles. They're going to be playing the 49ers. They're going to be playing the top teams across the board. I didn't talk about it in the last division, but for these guys, they're matching up with the AFC West. Again, another tough division. Maybe not tough. They're playing the Chiefs, right? So the other 3, maybe they match up pretty good. So maybe I'm wrong on that. They're playing the NFC East. They're going to play the Cowboys. They're going to play the Eagles. They're going to get these 2 guys. So I guess the only real tough opponent that they're going to have to play against is going to be the 49ers. Maybe I'm making too much of it, but I do have Detroit Lions there. It's about the same team. There's not a lot of change. The defense appears to have improved a little bit, and that was probably the thing holding them back last year, but it's going to be interesting if they can build off what they were last year, or if it was just a Cinderella story. And at number 1, we have the Green Bay Packers. I think they are going to just keep step forward. I think there's something about playing in Green Bay, being a Green Bay franchise, and the quarterback's just seeming to figure it out. The young wide receivers, and with Jordan Love, the young team last year, one of the youngest in the NFL, they started to figure out way down the stretch. It was a slow start, and I think having built that last year, I don't think they're going to have that kind of slow start again this year, and it's going to be very obvious really quick. And I do have them as my number 1 pick. Moving on. Go to the Carolina Panthers and the NFC South. Bryce Young coming back with not much improvement on his team. They got a new coach, but they're bringing in Clowney. Like, not much else going on. I think most projections have them worst in the power rankings overall. Feel bad for a quarterback like Bryce Young who comes into a league like this and always has to deal with that kind of situation and those kind of struggles. But the one thing going for him is the division isn't like walk away super amazing. It's probably one of the weaker divisions across the NFL, so at least you're going to have 6 games in competitive environments, but Carolina's probably going to be in for another long season. At number 3 in this division, I do have the New Orleans Saints. New offensive staff completely. It's going to make a big impact. How are they going to impact with Derek Carr? Not so sure, but they're going to have Kamara still in the backfield. They're going to have Olave on the wide. It's going to be a lot of the same key guys in their offense. So how they adapt with this new offensive coordinator, completely new offensive staff, it's going to remain to be seen. A lot of changes early. Probably going to take some time getting used to these new rules, new setups. Maybe they'll work out for them. But I do think there's still going to be a little bit of an edge behind the rest of the division. At number 2, I do have Baker Mayfield coming back down to earth a little bit. The O-line didn't seem to improve at all. And now with that being what was potentially one of their issues last year, Baker Mayfield, we're going to have to see another miracle, I think, for him. The plus side, they have Evans, they have Godwin. Those guys are still there. Evans is a year older. It's going to probably start to be a time where he's going to eventually start slowing down. Is this year? I don't know. I think it's going to be a timing change of the guard, because at number 1, I do have the Atlanta Falcons. And interestingly enough, I think this is the first time they sold out on season tickets. What was it, in 20 years? It might have been just 10 years. It was a long time. It was the first time they sold out on season tickets, because there's a lot of hype around this team. It's like the first time they have a real quarterback since Matt Ryan left. And with Kirk Cousins coming in, I think there's a lot of hype around Atlanta. And maybe I'm been sold in on that hype, and that's why I have them at number 1. But I think it's rightfully so, and that they kind of deserve it, because this division isn't a whole lot going for them. And they had a chance to win the division last year, and they had no quarterback. So moving on to the West. This one was interesting. I do have them being last place. They're playing the NFC South and the AFC North. And the Seahawks, this is their first season without Pete Carroll since I feel like I was a teenager. It's been so long he's been a member of that team. And I think it's going to impact them. They still have Geno Smith at the quarterback. It worked out for them last year. I don't know if it's going to continue to work out at some point or another. These guys got to really make a statement, I guess, and maybe it's the lack of consistency over the decade they've been in the league that has me doubting them, but that's kind of where I'm at. Of course, he still has Metcalf, he has Lockett, he has these guys that he has on the wideouts that are bailing out, but as these other teams start to get number 1 wide receivers, like I was talking about with the Giants, it's not going to mean as much going forward. They're going to have to make some more impactful decisions on this team. Geno Smith, Metcalf, and that's the Seahawks. At number 3, I do have the Arizona Cardinals. A lot of people probably have these guys at last. There's been a lot of talk about Kyler Murray looking real good coming out of training camp. And this is the first time, I think, in a couple of years that he's actually managed to train the whole offseason and in preseason and stuff like that. They do bring in Marvin Harrison Jr. I wasn't sure. I didn't look into it. Is that the Marvin Harrison son? I assume so, but he is a top prospect in the wide receiver. And with Kyler Murray, if he's on top of his game, I'm excited to see what kind of connection that builds. The defense seems to be doing pretty solid as well from what I have read. So I think the Cardinals are going to make a step forward. And meanwhile, I think the Seahawks just aren't quite there. At number 2, I do have the Rams. And a big part of this is that Cooper Kupp is looking like he's going to be healthy and ready to go come start of the season. The one downside to them is they did have Aaron Donald retire, so that's going to be a big hit. I don't know if he's going to be able to be replaced. He was the number 1 guy double teamed all season last year, so that's probably going to impact their defensive numbers quite drastically. You just can't replace a guy like that. But on the offensive side of the ball, I don't think there's going to be any struggle. So at the same time, I think they're going to pick up some solid wins. This is a team, though, that this is a division where I could see the Rams really starting to struggle if that defense doesn't come around, because at the end of the day, the Arizona Cardinals do seem to have an offense that they're building towards, trending towards a good one. And the Rams, if they get in the shootouts, who knows if they can actually hold it. At the number 1 spot, and for a lot of people, the Super Bowl pick on this side of the bracket is the San Francisco 49ers. They seem to have almost the exact same team pretty much that they rolled out to the Super Bowl last year. So that is a huge bonus. Purdy seemed like he had it under control last year, but at the end of this year, this is probably going to be the last year that they can roll out this kind of team. A lot of guys coming up for contracts, a lot of stuff like that. They're not going to be able to keep this whole team together. So this is really a last shot at it. Very rarely does a team that makes the Super Bowl and lose go back and make it again and win. It's happened, I think, twice over the past 2 decades. I can't remember off the top of my head who it was. I know one was the Patriots, and I can't quite remember. Maybe it was the Eagles was the other one. I'm trying to guess. But there you have it, guys. San Francisco 49ers, I think, are the lock for this division. I'm pretty confident about 3 of these division leads. Maybe the North is wrong. Potentially Dallas steps up and has an amazing season. We've seen it time and time again. But this is what I am predicting for the NFL season. It kicks off in a couple of days. And in case you missed it, I talked at the beginning, I am running a survivor pool for the channel. Link and information will all be in the comments below, in the description below. If you want to join, make sure you check that out. It's free entry, giving away a hat for the winner. It'll be fun, exciting, something to keep us entertained for the season to come. And guys, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Smash that like button. We'll see you for that next video.